And yeah, some of you might be looking for funding. What he's looking for in founders might be of interest to some people in this room. So, and then, there's also people in the room that got a lot of value through this ACTAI global network, especially, this kind of story Canva. So we'll kind of touch on that. So when you say Bill, this is how most people know Bill, right? It's like
before the back injury.
Gosh, he's like this badass kiter, First, in case anyone didn't hear him last night, because it was kind of not hard to hear. First check in Zoom, okay? Seeded Canva at a 3 million cap. I've always been thinking it was higher, but then you corrected me.
Average, yeah. The round was 8, but I helped put it together, so my average is probably 3 million value, something like that.
Okay, Canva's maybe worth, 47?
Something, 40 billion.
40 billion, probably, who's counting, whatever. Seeded Dapper Labs, seeded now 23 publicly traded companies. So I don't know many people I don't know anyone who's done that. He's also co-founded companies like Treasure Data that got bought by SoftBank and ARM, and he helped to co-found MetaGood, he helped to co-found Livin, so many incredible companies. But before this, there was this, which is Bill as the number 1 employee at TSMC, which is one of the 10 most valuable companies in the world.
I helped write their business plan.
Yeah, so let me just give a minute or a couple minutes on how did you, who is this and how did you get there?
Okay, so to go way back, when I was about 9 years old, my dad bought me a Radio Shack 100-in-1 electronic projects kit. He's a brilliant, crazy, wacky inventor type. He's 26 patents. And we used to just build stuff all the time. And somehow, I think in 1972 or so, I read this article called Secrets of the Little Blue Box. And I highly recommend you read this because it's an article, I think in Esquire magazine, about 2 kids, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, in the company that they had before Apple. And in that era, the telephone networks had just gotten kind of digitized, and there was a carrier frequency that allowed the different computer systems to communicate at 2600 hertz. And there's so many wacky coincidences around this. So, for example, they're in the Captain Crunch cereal box. They used to give plastic toys. One year, there was a blue whistle. If you blew that whistle into the payphone at the right time on an 800 number call, you could take over the switching system and make free phone calls at a time when long distance calls were like $1 to $3 a minute. And the guy that did that, he's a friend. His name's John Draper. He lives in Las Vegas now. Some of you guys are there. He has the code name Captain Crunch. And so this, along with a bunch of other people, there was this wave of people that would create 2600 hertz frequency synthesizers. And that was the first product that Steve Wozniak built. And they were selling those until they got arrested. And then they kind of hung it up, and because AT&T was suing everybody, and that caused them to start Apple Computer. But anyway, so I got a hold of that article, which made me very curious, and I think around 13, I found a schematic, and I built it. And I basically cloned it, and I'd ride my bicycle to Moraine Valley Community College, and I would make phone calls just to test if I could hack the network. Anyway, so that led me to electrical engineering, and then when I was in college, I had this crazy summer job where Ronald Reagan was president, and they created the Star Wars program. And they wanted to, I think somebody saw the movie Firefox, so they wanted to make the F-16 jet fly by talking to it. And Texas Instruments had dominated the world with DSPs. They had this DSP series and the toys, the Speak and Spell and all that stuff. And a guy built this 7-board computer system that was about like 2 desktop computer size. And they wanted somebody to shrink it down into a 2x4x6 module. And I got that job. I was a sophomore in college, and I found a couple startups in Silicon Valley. One was this one. And I just thought it was the fucking greatest technology in the world, because you could literally, for a bunch of you take these things and shrink them down to something the size of your hand. And so I I used that technology to architect a 5-chip system. I took the whole thing and shrank it down, but I joined the company. And so that was run by the CEO of Fairchild. And as I mentioned the other day, some of the other guys with me, Jensen Huang, people that became the CEOs of Altera and Xilinx and created Broadcom, not the founder, not the two Henrys, but the guy that turned it into a business from a consulting business. They all worked with me. And so it was like a little hotbed, but I left there. Jensen went to start NVIDIA, and I went to Taiwan to help write this plan. I had no idea that it would be a $1 trillion market cap company. Some days looking crazy. But that's those two.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, Bill, why were you wearing bow tie? Looks like you're in a tuxedo.
Yeah, that was a thing in our company for some reason. Bill O'Meara, yeah, the VP. Yeah, at the time. That would have been like 1984, I think.
And then this one's just interesting because, I mean, you've moved from heavy CapEx, right, chips,
Yeah, so
to now, I mean, you've been on this CNBC Disruptor 50, like many of the companies you've invested in, these are just 3 from 22.
Yeah, I started off in chips, and I knew that industry so well that I think for the first, I went into venture around 1991. This is year 34 for me, so it's been a long time. But I started funding a bunch of chip companies, and then I started to move up the stack a bit, and then I started to fund router and switch and communications equipment companies in the early 90s. And then this internet thing happened, and I started an ISP in, I think, 1994, and it became data centers in 10 countries by year 2000, and then Goldman, Solomon, and Morgan took it public. So 25 years ago, I retired for the first time. And I had been a windsurfer, and I started a kite, and then I became sponsored as an athlete, and then Web 2.0 started, and I could tell that there was going to be another wave. So I went back into venture, and then I started doing a bunch of more. The whole capital model changed because I was saying yesterday that chip industry, it wasn't uncommon for me to have to circle up $500 million or so and get these companies to kind of $5 million to $7 million a month burn rates, keep them alive for 5 to 7 years before we would ship a product. And it was hard. And it was taught me to be very patient. But after the world internet infrastructure got built out, including mine, which covered 10 countries, I had all these companies building stuff on there, and it was crazy because I was starting to see things like, the Mark Zuckerberg starting stuff in dorm rooms, and I was like, there's going to be a wave. And so I came back into the business, and I started seeding in a very different way, and not having to do $100 million, expecting $500 million. I thought, I can fund these myself. so I started seeding kind of web companies around. It took me a while to get that, but.
And then I love this article. This is from 2019. It says,
this
we
is
talk a little bit about this, and if anyone can, this is Melanie Perkins here.
Yeah, this was, so along with the kiteboarding, I started to gather up groups of entrepreneurs because I was working with a bunch of old dudes mostly in infrastructure, and the whole world had changed. And my windsurfing world had changed to all these kids, like Jesse Richmond kiting, and it used to be these old windsurfers like Robbie Nash, who's obviously very good too. But those two waves kind of coincided. And so I started to throw these gatherings kind of like this, where I would invite a bunch of interesting entrepreneurs to just figure out what they were like, facilitate conversations on what they were working on, and I'd pick some out to fund. And this particular trip was crazy because I say 30 billion, but the market value off that trip was $200 billion, which I can't even believe. But it was that was a year that both Canva and Zoom started. We had started the fundraise for the seed of Canva a month before on Maui, and we happened to have a trip to Necker Island, so we had Melanie pitch. Zoom was a year old, and this is a fun article if you guys look it up, but we had never really tried Zoom in a hostile environment. And having run networks before, I knew that like Australia to the USA was 100 milliseconds long, and it was kind of the edge of what you could do with video. I get to Necker, and I take a sniffer at something to test bandwidth and all that. 400 milliseconds to California. I was like, oh shit. And we had lined up presentations to Richard from London, New York, Mountain View, Tokyo, San Jose, just like all over the world. I was like, shit, none of this is gonna work. And then so we ended up renting a microwave link to Virgin Gorda to cut like, I think 3 router hops for whatever, but we shortened it to like 150. And we went and did this thing, but on that trip were, you know, Melanie that formed Canva. We would launch Zoom for the first real use. Color Genomics. Othman Laraki was on that trip presenting a company. The Treasure Data guys, you know, I found these 2 engineers from Japan that didn't speak English, and I started a company around them that we ended up selling for $700 million called Treasure Data. God, I can't remember all that, but there are all these things just blossomed out of this one many trips, because, you know, like Ring Doorbell and all these other things were part of our community too, but this one just kind of like, it was just a magical trip. So it's a fun read because it's just about what happens on our trips in these places.
And then you put these in the WhatsApp. I know everyone's been surfing and running around. Maybe you want to tell a little bit the story.
Yeah, is Chris still here?
Canva
Chris?
and Chris.
Yeah, so I want to weave Chris into this too, because actually in Silicon, a friend, Terrence left. Terrence used to be with Silicon Valley Bank. He's not the guy that called me, but there was a guy from Silicon Valley Bank that married an Australian woman who was from Perth. He moves to Australia. He's there for a number of years, and he like misses the Valley. He decides he wants to throw like a little tech conference there, and he needs a venture capitalist to come talk about commercialization. And he was on the commercialization advisory board for Curtin University in Perth, Australia. Unbeknownst to everyone in the world, Curtin University in Perth holds a patent on Wi-Fi. Crazy, out of Perth, Australia. Anyway, so he invited research projects from 7 major universities to come all the way to Perth, which is really far away, if any of you guys have been there. And he calls me up one day, and he knew I was kite addicted, so he's like, hey, Bill, he goes, I got a deal for you. I said, what's that? And he said, I'm organizing this conference, and I got the university to fund it, and I can get them to cover your kiting for a week if you'll come and just talk for an hour. And I had always wanted to go and windsurf, wave sail Margaret River when I was a windsurfer, and it was also good for kiting. So I was like, sure. And then I started looking at flights, like 26 hours to like, holy shit, 16 hours to Singapore, a layover, like, oh man, this is far. But I went. Okay, so on this trip, and this was right at the time I had done this gear shift to be funding like 1- and 2-person companies like, Tango and Voxer and all these like, TweetDeck and Twitter. And is Dom still here? Dom's not here.
He is here. Dom.
Now I was just talking
Dom,
about
we're talking about
the
you.
shift to like these, kind of these webby companies away from infrastructure, and how I met you, because we had seeded Twitter. Of all things, we had funded the predecessor company called Odeo, which kind of flamed out because iTunes came out. It was Odeo was the #1 podcast directory site, and then Apple came out with iTunes, and the traffic just plummeted. So there were like a pile of engineers there, listless, not knowing what to do, and they held an internal hackathon. So there were 3 people, including Dom, that created Twitter and presented it. I should say, presented Twitter.
Quickly, the story goes, Jack was really nobody when I met him. He was a junior engineer, and couldn't really describe his own idea.
He was so awkward, really awkward.
And I was in this like tiny group. I liked him a lot. I like nerds. And I was like, I wanted to hang out with this guy, listen to what he had to say. He described a use case that was so horrible, I would not allow that to be presented. And I actually gave him another one. He said, actually, Don, that's a little better. Why don't you present it? So I'm responsible for the chaos of Twitter, unfortunately. In that tiny way. I didn't actually join the company because of a long story, which I wrote a book about. But it's called 140 characters if you need it. Most likely for free somewhere. I'll if you want. But the short story is that pivot was the first pivot I'd ever heard of. And it was the first hackathon I'd ever been a part of. And so I thought, well, let's do this hackathon thing forever. And so I started doing Developer Camp, which now Bill and Amanda
And instead of Twitter, he went to go do the when Barack Obama was running for president, the iPhone app and all that stuff. That's his.
The first iPhone app that we call it activism.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, and so we did that with his help, and then I'll never forget the day we shipped it. We did it under NDA, so we couldn't tell anyone. Couldn't tell our families, couldn't tell our bosses. We disappeared for 3 weeks. It was us. And long story short, the day we were to actually release it, we got this phone call from an unknown number, and we pick it up, and it goes, "Hello, this is Steve." "Hey, Steve, it's Steve Jobs."
Oh.
And he calls us to thank us because he found our names in the credits. And he's like, "Listen, I really appreciate what you're doing. We're going to feature the app in the App Store. And want to just let you know that if you have another release, just let us know. We'll push it right away." And so I got to go, but I really appreciate your work. And we just were floored. Our tweets were all like, "OMG, OMG, OMG." And then they shipped it in half the App Store at the time, which, to be honest, was only maybe 500,000 people because the App Store had just launched. But it was the front page of the App Store for that launch that year. And then it got, I think, 50,000 phone calls made in swing states, and it's a long story to read about online. But Bill.
So, anyways, yeah. So there was a gear shift in that era where it went from these heavy, guys that had done 3 product cycles on routers to web children, and it was so hard for me in the beginning because as you guys heard maybe assume, I can be a bit technical on semiconductor router, in that segment of the industry. You can predict what the performance of a product will be, and if you know it is better, you will sell it if you know what the specs are. So very predictable but capital intensive. And all of a sudden, I felt like I was like a record producer walking into a bar, listening to 10 people sing, and having to figure out that the short, fat, bald guy would become Phil Collins, and that I had to pick that one, And so I had to meet a lot of people and start to get in the flow, and then, but I was open to it and willing to completely. All my other friends in semiconductors just climbed up the stack to become the CEOs, and every wave I just hopped off to the next one and the next one into being uncomfortable and having to relearn everything. And so here I am, talking to Delphine is now 22. Melanie was 23. And she describes to me, she had dropped out of college, was teaching Adobe classes. And there's a whole nother side story, which in 1986, I did one little consulting gig for a company that made photo typesetters. They had $500 million in cash, and they saw digital coming, and I made a couple recommendations. The number one thing I told them, you should buy this startup in the Valley. You can get it for about $40 million. It's called Adobe. And they passed. And so over decades, I saw Adobe grow to, at the time, $30 billion in market cap. And I was a customer paying $900 for a cardboard box with a CD-ROM that I wasn't sure would run on my computer or not, and just all kinds of problems. And I was and I was funding Cloud Mobile at that time. And when she told me what she wanted, I was like, absolutely, this is cool. This Adobe is not going to exist at some point. Can you build this? And she says, oh, no, I'm not technical. I said, well, if you can find somebody who can build what you described, I might back you. And so it took almost 3 years for me to leverage our network to find, through Lars Rasmussen, who was taught to kite, Cameron Adams, bolt them together. And then we had her present on a kite trip in Maui. And, a little piece of that. It happened to be the president of Shutterfly, the ex-president of Shutterfly was learning to kite with us, and he was in the audience, and he heard the pitch, and it was called Canvas Chef at the time. And the presentation had a pizza with slices, and you'd put them together to create your design. And she got enough feedback from Chris and others that they dropped the S in the chef, and it became Canva. And the marketplace idea came from Johnsini. And after the presentation, Dave walks up to me and said, after break, he said, hey, I kind of like that Canvas Chef thing. Can I invest in it? And then I knew that it might actually be time, because I'd been talking to people about it for a while, but you have to wait till the sugar water's super saturated. And I was like, this might be the moment. So I got Ken Goldman together, and I was like, what will you put in? And he committed $25K, and I said, let's turn this one around. So Melanie lived in Chris's house for
about 3 months.
yeah, this round.
Came for a week.
Came for a week, stayed for
Yeah.
3 months.
Yeah, but that, then we basically put that round together, and but it's Canva now. It's like crazy. But that's how these things start.
Yeah, and I know we need to leave. I think we have a car coming at 7:15. So yeah, so so we got about 6 minutes and maybe a couple less.
Yeah, so
but, yeah.
the nonprofit. This is a nonprofit that has come out. So we started to throw these kite trips around 2003, and then they kind of turned into something around 2006. They used to be windsurfing trips before, and then over time, I love this quote. The kiteboarding group started to grow, and it went from Maui. We started doing things at Cabarete. Richard Branson started a kite, and then we started to do two kite trips a year with him off of his island. And then those started to grow. Oh, and then Melanie, I threw a startup. I was having so much fun in Perth that year. I said, I'm going to come back and throw a startup competition because there's these coders everywhere. And so I said, I'm going to bring back a bunch of my friends from Maui, and we're going to throw a contest, and whoever wins, I'll give you a year of free hosting. And so we threw a contest. Melanie entered that first year. She didn't place in the top 10 out of 120. So she didn't pitch in the end. But that turned into something called the Extreme Tech Challenge, which is not in here, but it became this worldwide startup competition. It's now a separate nonprofit that has partnered with the UN. They throw contests with the World Food Forum around the SDGs, around many different subject matters. And so that kind of came off of that. And then the kite trips on Necker started to become, we used to throw the contests at the end of those trips. And then, that Bitcoin thing you saw, I helped launch a digital currency in 2003. So 6 years before Bitcoin, I was Alan Greenspan Gollum in Second Life, and we had the Linden dollar. So I was very tuned already to digital currency. So by 2010, when I saw the architecture of Bitcoin, I was like, this is it. And then if you guys know Bitfury, I ended up paying for that ASIC. We were more than 50% of the world mining hash power. 2013, 14, 800,000 Bitcoins we mined. But and then that became Hut 8 and Cypher Mining. There's still Bitfury and a bunch of other Crystal software. There's like 5 companies out of that now that we'll see how they do. But I threw this blockchain summit. Mt. Gox got hacked, and the industry started to get kind of sleazy. So I wanted to try to turn the ship. So I talked to Richard about starting something called the Necker Blockchain Summit. And in 2015 or 2016, I had the chairman of the CFTC, the SEC, people from the Department of Justice, Interpol, Katie Hahn, and I wanted to help create applications for social good, because I knew that the blockchain could do a lot more than just handle value, things. There was an economist that I brought there named Hernando de Soto, who had set up the land titling systems and the economies therefore in 13 countries. And I set about to basically automate his brain, because he had done all these things. So I wanted to turn that into a software program so that any country could put this stuff on the blockchain. I was way too early. I'm always way too early. Like I was telling the people that know me, I have to be very patient. I've learned to be really patient, because things that I think of, I literally have to put in a drawer for 7 or 8 years, and then take them out, and then it's time. And anyway, so he's the one that had this thing. So he comes to this thing I'm throwing on Necker, and I'm emceeing this thing, and all of a sudden he's, stop. Like, what? And he wants to talk. I give him the mic, and he said, I just have to say something. And I said, what's that, Hernando? And he says, this reminds me of a quote from Aristotle. Okay. I was like, okay. And he says, and this is what he said. And this one was illogical to me, because there's like 2 levels at the same thing. I was like, well, how can it be that your potential is greater than what it is? But what he said is, what's happening here, which is what's happening here. When you take a bunch of people and you allow them to interact, stuff happens. Because if you think about it from like, imagine a shelf of chemicals and bottles on a shelf. When they're isolated, nothing happens. But if you take that shit and just throw the shelf down and everything's on the floor, the intermingling creates reactions. And so I think what has happened over the decades with ACTAI is we create, in a way, a forum that's a different forum because it's not a conference, but it's a way for all of you to interact with each other. And you'll see, and you can already tell, you've made some new friends, you've got people that you share interests with. There are companies that probably will come out of this trip, whether or not they make it. Like even the Philippines, you and Brian, like people form these things, and all of a sudden these companies pop up, and it's just a magical thing to see, which is part of why we keep doing them. But this quote, I think this is on our website because it just struck me, and Hernando pointed it out. This is what's happening.
Yeah.
Is this the last slide, or is there
Yeah,
more?
that's it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, thank you.
And I know we're short on time, but
Yeah,
if there's a question or two, or if people got to run, go ahead and leave.
Chris, you're the boss. Do we need to go right now?
Can you talk for a second about the metaphor you gave us about how you think about investment, how you decide which companies to invest in? I always find that fascinating.
Yeah. That's good.
So you guys probably you all know Sequoia Capital. You probably don't know Don Valentine, who was the founder of Sequoia and Solo VC for many years before he hired Pierre Lemon. I was so lucky to be in that first startup, LSI Logic, as we were so early in the cycle. Our two backers, so there's this ecosystem out of Fairchild Semiconductor. Fairchild spun out Intel, National, AMD, LSI Logic, and many other companies, and Kleiner Perkins. So Tom Perkins teamed up with Eugene Kleiner to start KP. Don was the VP of sales at National. Those were our two investors, along with IVP, who I later joined at LSI Logic. And there's a longer story, which I won't tell because it'd take too long, of how I interacted with Don, because I was supposed to learn how to do sales and marketing from him. But when I went into the venture business, I started to tag along with him. And this is fun, too, for Sequoia, which tells you something. It was like a tiny fund. And I was at dinner with him after a board meeting for a company that I funded with him called Microchip, which I think hit $100 billion in market cap a few years ago. But Don, we were at dinner, and I said to him, I was like in my 20s, I was like, Don, what do I have to do to be good at this? and Don, if you know his reputation, he's a very harsh, terse, doesn't say much. He's kind of a brutal guy. And he said, it's really simple. You only have to get 3 things right. Markets, management, don't overpay. Because if you do those 3 things right, you'll make money every time. But if you get the market wrong, you'll lose money every time. He goes, you can have the best team in the world and infinite money. You choose the wrong market, you're dead. So all you got to do is pick the right market, swap the people in and out until it works, and keep the valuation low. And so that stuck in my head for decades as I learned, through some wins and some losses, different things that would happen. And so that is still my formula, is kind of choose. So I spend my time thinking a lot about what's going to unfold when, and trying to pick. And it's just like everything you did today when you're surfing and paddling. If your timing is right, you only have to paddle twice. And if you're too far in front of the wave, you just wear yourself out and you watch somebody else snipe the wave and ride it. So you can't be too early. You definitely can't be too late. You have to be just a little ahead of the wave, and you got to get a good rider with integrity. And so I basically spend my time meeting people, and I have a little library in my head of people. And many of you know some of these people, but the people that started Tango, Danny at MetaGood, Othman at Color Genomics, and there's probably a dozen others that I told them years before I funded them, anytime you start a company, I will write a check. And that's turned into tens of billions of market cap just by picking the right people and in helping steer them. It's what Raimana does. You take a rider and you know the waves, you see the waves coming, and it's like, how do you get that person in the right place with the right equipment, which is team? and then just enough capital. And if you do it right, you don't need much capital. Because, and I always tell the companies that I work with really closely, if they'll listen to me, they tend to get profitable on very little capital. So like, a Canva and a Zoom, they both got profitable on like $30 or $40 million, which may or may not sound like a lot to you guys, but in the context of all venture things, it's very small. And it enables an early investor to have returns that are not just 10x, but 10,000x. I've had several of those. So if you can keep it really tight and then end up in giant markets that become really big, you don't have to do very many, and you don't have to work very hard either. Like if Ramana doesn't actually work hard, this is all fun for you, right? There you go. So it's kind of like you just pick the right rider, coach them along. Hopefully the wave is good, and you just
big, tall, skinny.
yeah. Entrepreneurs come in all flavors. Yes.
Yeah, but most important is the result.
Yeah, yeah. But that's basically it. Market timing. Certain characteristics, kind of a leadership charisma, high integrity, ability to lead a team that may or may not be durable for, different size companies have different characteristics, but some, like Melanie, I've been blown away. But a lot of it's her co-founder, Cliff, that people don't really know very well, but she had the charisma. He has the operating instinct that I wasn't sure about when I first funded, but he is really good. And they needed a CTO, and that was Cameron. We had to get that missing chunk. But that's it. Markets, team, timing, pick stuff, at least for me, pick stuff that doesn't take a lot of money, because life is for me, life is a lot lighter and happier if you're not having to do rounds that are hundreds of millions. And if I can get something profitable, and you guys that know, that came to our other stuff, like Alex Taylor, that's one of my more recent projects, but I think I'm gonna get that one profitable with him on 25 million. And I don't, can't promise anything, but I think it has a shot of being a $10 billion outcome at some point. So I think it has a shot at that 10,000x. I think it does.
That's our largest position in the fund, thankfully.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well, we'll see. But
let's see.
a lot of things can
Let's
go
see,
wrong
let's see,
along
let's
the
see,
way.
let's see.
Yeah, the jet ski might stop working.
Yeah,
He
leash
might
could get
fall off
caught,
the
who
board. There
knows?
might be some regulatory changes in healthcare. I don't know. Like there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. But at least at the moment, if that one feels like it's all lined up.
Right,
That one's called dyad.net if you guys want to look it up. There's not-
dyad.net.
Not a lot on the website, but I have a lot. He was another guy that I just picked. He was the CTO of Cambridge Analytica, and they were evilly good at what they did. And I had started this company, Treasure Data, which if you ever used Wish.com, how many of you at one time used Wish? Okay, so there's a very simple problem on that one. When you come to Wish, how does Wish know what to show you? Should they be showing you motorcycles? Or should they show you makeup? Like, how do they know? Okay, so what we did there was exactly what they did at Cambridge Analytica. We created the login through Facebook, and as soon as you clicked on that, we'd go to your page, up and down, we would characterize everything you did. We'd go into your friends' networks and see who they were, and we would gather this pile of data. We'd know male, female, age range, interests, and then we'd populate the page. And then every time you clicked on something, we would basically iterate and tune so that it's like the Amazon recommendation engine too. And we did products, he did votes. So, unfairly, they were seen as causing Brexit and the first Trump victory and all that, and a lot of heat came on him, and then they got sued. But I knew he was good, so I was like, Alex, when this is all over, I'm starting something with you. And we did an experiment in AI supply chain. COVID hit, wound that up, and I was like, healthcare, let's do healthcare. And now it's Dyad. I'm gonna go.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing me.
Yeah, I'm glad you can make it. Glad you can make it.